But Utley was not the same player for the last 4 years. He stunk. But no one would throw a beer bottle at Chase Utley. And as Frank Klose writes at 97.3 ESPN.com, Ryan Howard deserves better. Here's a guy who won an MVP award for a 5-year span, was historically one of the best 5-year runs that I could ever put numbers up against, Frank. And, you talk about all the news Sunday about the Phillies fan who threw the bottle at Ryan Howard. You write, here's a guy who deserves better. Why do you think that Howard gets the treatment he does?
I think it's all because of his contract. I mean, it seems for some reason that in Philadelphia, when a player gets paid a lot of money, the expectations go absolutely through the roof, almost to a point where somebody can never, ever, ever actually meet what the people expect. And, when you blow your Achilles right before your contract starts, I think there's a lot of resentment in Philadelphia over that contract.
So to you, it's strictly a monetary thing. If this guy's getting paid $6 million, because that's one thing about Utley, that he didn't make a ridiculous amount of money for the contributions he made. He wasn't a $20 million guy. He didn't sign one of those gaudy contracts. Do you think things would be different for Ryan Howard if he never signed that deal?
I think so. I think what probably would have happened is if he had gotten hurt like that, the Phillies probably would have given him like a couple of year deal to try to rehab him, and he probably would have underperformed. But I think people would have felt sorry for him. I mean, you remember back in 2012 when the Phillies really rushed him back from that injury. But in 2012, when the Phillies were bringing him along and he was rehabbing in the minor leagues, fans turned out in droves to follow through and see him rehab and to cheer him along. But I think just when the whole picture kind of got into focus and he's making $25 million and giving nothing. I mean, let's face it, too. You mentioned Chase Utley, but I want to bring up another name. In my observations in the last couple of years, Phillies fans turned on Cliff Lee, too. Also a $25 million. Actually, he signed a contract that was almost identical to Ryan Howard's, in terms of length and dollars. And fans kind of turned on him, too. The last couple of years, as Lee was hurt and they're seeing no production, and the Phillies are basically giving a third of their payroll to Howard and Lee combined. Fans were kind of rough on Cliff Lee, too.
Yeah, not nearly as rough as the treatment that Howard got the other night, Frank, where a fan threw a beer bottle at him. That is what is being reported. And as I'll ask you, has this been acknowledged and verified by the Phillies?
Well, the Phillies verified that there was a gentleman named Brian Tracy who witnessed the incident. And what he did was really fast because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He took a picture with a cell phone, and then he sent it out via Twitter. And the Phillies did confirm to Ryan Lawrence of Philly Voice that the guy that he took a picture of is indeed the guy who did it. And the Phillies had security cameras that they couldn't necessarily make him out so perfectly. But this gentleman, Brian Tracy, his picture really was the other side of the puzzle where they did get a good view of the gentleman. Now, as far as I know, they haven't caught the gentleman yet. In fact, I shouldn't be calling him a gentleman. That's awfully kind of me.
No.
But the perpetrator has not been caught yet as far as I know. But the Phillies do verify that the picture that is going around is indeed the guy who did it. And they really do want to see him prosecuted.
As the Phillies, any video inside the stadium? Do they have surveillance cameras inside that stadium that could show him in the act?
I believe so, and then there were a couple of witnesses. I believe Matt Breen of the Philadelphia Inquirer also witnessed it. So, in fact, Matt Breen was one of the first to ask Howard about it, because he did witness it happen. So there are witnesses, and the gentleman who took the picture was also a witness. And from the cameras in the stadium, it sounds like they could definitely capture him in his unique salmon color shorts. And it was just a matter of getting a good view of his face. And again, that gentleman, Brian Tracy, who thought to take a picture really fast, he seems to have captured the face.
Have you spoken to the guy, Brian Tracy?
I have. He did witness and I did pass his information on to the Phillies so that they could talk to him about it.
Okay, so he basically says, this is what I saw. I have no video. I just saw this happen, and I wanted to take a picture. Because basically what I've been saying is the Philly fans are getting a bad name, obviously, but here's a guy who's saying, look, I don't want us to be clumped in with him, and what I'm doing is making sure that we as a Phillies group, find this guy, right? I mean, that's what basically his intention was.
Right, and I think, too, a lot of the Phillies fans are equally upset, and I think that even the ones that booed him, for the most part, are saying, well, we never wanted something like that to happen. So, in some respects, perhaps this is helping create a renewed appreciation of Ryan Howard from the comments I could see. I think they're really starting to reflect on his whole career as a Philadelphia Philly, and I think that realizing that it kind of spiraled into this. I mean, let's face it, this is kind of like in the midst, and I think I used the phrase, a culture of discontent, or a culture of almost a culture of hate that sort of has been left to fester in terms of Phillies fans to Ryan Howard. And I think for some of them, I think it just kind of sobered them up in a sense, where they realize, oh yes, this guy really has done a lot for us, and I think that they're very interested in making sure that this person is prosecuted. Because if you don't have this overwhelming feeling like it collectively that this guy is, that this Ryan Howard is the enemy, well then maybe somebody doesn't even think twice and wouldn't even dare throw a bottle, because I don't think they're throwing a bottle at any other person who grounds out at the end of the game.
Yeah, now, I don't know if you were covering the game when it happened, but was Ryan Howard noticeably affected by this?
Yeah, well, he expressed his great disappointment. He felt that this was personal. But he essentially said, you can boo me all you want, for my performance. That's one thing. He said, but to have something thrown at me, that kind of crosses the line. He called the act tasteless, and he kind of took it very personally in this case.
Frank Klose is with us. He's got a great piece up at 973ESPN.com. Is this the legacy Philly fans will want to leave for Ryan Howard, a guy who's getting booed, trash thrown at him off the field? Really despicable. And kind of sad, Frank, when you think about it, that somebody really thought, you know what, I am so disgusted by this. I want to ask you one thing. You mentioned the contract, and I surmise that, look, in hindsight, is it a bad deal? Did he live up to it? Of course not. The 5-year stretch he had before that, did it warrant to him to have it? Probably. The Phillies, in my opinion, were trying to set the market at that time, in a time where Pujols and Teixeira and Alex Gonzalez, or Adrian Gonzalez, were all coming up for free agency. Did the Phillies recognize that and say, look, we need to set the market before these guys set the market, and maybe they jumped the gun and signed him too soon? But is there any justification in hindsight of the decision they made to give him that deal?
My personal take, I always thought that it wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. Now, granted, he was making $500,000 winning MVP as such. So when you looked at that situation, you knew that those players would get 10-year deals. The Prince Fielders and the Albert Pujols. The Phillies are finishing up Howard's 5th year. Imagine if you signed one of those other guys and they had 5 years of contract after this one. It's going to be a nightmare for the Angels. It's going to be a nightmare. And luckily, the Detroit Tigers got out of the Prince Fielder contract. I don't know how they got the Rangers to take it. But, you look at how the Rangers, at least the Rangers and the Angels have a designated hitter that they can stuff these guys. But, I think the Phillies kind of felt that, look, we're probably going to pay a little bit more in average annual value right now, but we won't have to go as long as 8-10 years like the Prince Fielders and Albert Pujols has got, and I think they recognize with it comes the amount of risk, and there's risk for Howard too, because if Howard is hitting 40-50 bombs every year, well then he's performing greater than his contract is. But the Phillies at the same time said, you know what, there is some risk on our part, because if he gets drastically hurt, well, then we're not going to reap the benefit of this. And unfortunately, that's what happened. I mean, that Achilles injury is no joke. I mean, there's very few athletes that have really successfully come back from that. In some, that injury has ended their career.
Frank Klose, read his piece at 973ESPN.com. Don't forget to check out SportsTalkPhilly.com and all the Phillies news from Philadelphia.com, where you can see more from Frank Klose and the guys. And, of course, 973ESPN.com. Tomorrow we'll have the Frank back with the Phillies mailbag as they get ready to take on the Cubs in another 3-game set tonight after a split with the Brewers. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Mike.